The problem with making Superman's son bisexual, as they say in this article, is essentially that from a storytelling standpoint, like I said, you really have nowhere to go from it. I know this article is trying to point out that, he's taking him in a bold new direction. But what new direction does he gonna have? There's no twists or turns. Nobody's gonna come out against him. Because then, why make your characters homophobic? You're not gonna, and this isn't a shocking twist to get sales because you're not gonna get any increased sales. And so the other thing is, why is Jonathan Kent's boyfriend indestructible? The problem is, I love this, it says, we couldn't be prouder to tell this important story. No, you couldn't be prouder to get social media points as well as to get points from all these websites like the Washington Post. We talk a lot about the power of the DC multiverse in our storytelling. This isn't really storytelling. There's nowhere to go from a storytelling standpoint, because you can't go forward, and if you go backward, it makes you look like a coward. And no, it's not about time. They already have a lot of characters that are bisexual, or gay, or black, or whatever. They already have tons of characters like that. And so the problem with this, and when you look at this, it's essentially a ploy to get internet points and to get social media cred, but also to try to increase sales. But from a long-term standpoint and a storytelling standpoint, you wrote yourself into a ditch. Because let's compare it to something else. You've got Batman, A Death in the Family, which is from 1988, and it's a stunt. It was a stunt to get sales, and they had a 900 number, and that was used, and people voted on who to kill, and it was Jason Todd. And now the story isn't that great, and but this was a very one that you could go forward with story-wise, and there were consequences to this story. There was character development. And then another one that's a Superman story is The Death and Return of Superman. And I remembered this when I was in elementary school. This was a big deal. Or The Death and Reign of Superman. I call it The Death and Return of Superman. And this was written by a lot of people that knew how to actually tell good comics. Roger Stern, Dan Jurgens, Louise Simonson, Jerry Ordway, Carl Kesel. And this one had a lot bigger impact, and you could go forward as a writer and have much long-term sales on it. And it was also a ploy to, a publicity stunt, if you will, to bring up the sales in it. But it worked. And like I said, it had a lot of really cool story arcs going on at the time afterwards. And then, we have another one that's a Batman story, which is, Nightfall, which is, Bruce Wayne gets crippled by Bane, and then he gets replaced by Azrael. And this was another one that had a lot of great build-up and storytelling consequences going forward from it that impacted the character. Of course, you also had another one that was a big crossover event, which was, Cataclysm. And that was from 1998. And that had a lot of really, really good cool storytelling events that you could do from it. Gotham was split by a huge earthquake, and all the villains were able to take over certain districts, and Batman had to deal with that. And there was a lot of, going forward, you could push a lot of things and push the characters in really cool, interesting ways. This, again, there's nowhere to really go with this. It's like he comes out as bisexual and everybody's supportive of it. There's no conflict. There's no character movement. There's nothing that pushes this story forward besides Tom Taylor being smug during interviews and trying to act like, he's the first one to do something like this, which he's not. This is, behind the scenes, this is quite clearly a ploy to boost sales that's probably not going to work. And, the issue with this is his friend is indestructible. His boyfriend is indestructible too. So where do you go from there? He can't be put in harm's way. And no, it's not about time. They've already got characters like that. Again, I point you back to this storyline right here, the death of Superman. Everybody remembers this. It had a huge impact on the character. It had a lot of really cool writers behind it. It had a lot of great storytelling consequences. It wasn't the writers writing themselves into a ditch. I mean, it did seem like a publicity stunt, and it probably was. I think there was a point about that. Perch already did a video on it. But from a writing standpoint, it was really interesting to read about. Nightfall, another really, really cool Batman story. And, a death in the family is not that great of a story, but it's got a lot of, from a storytelling standpoint, it's got things that you could do with the character going forward from it. And it had a lot of long-lasting storylines that came from it. And the same went for, Cataclysm, that was a huge crossover. But it was a really cool crossover. This one was all of Gotham is nearly taken apart by a huge earthquake after a viral outbreak. So these right here, this was the one that, from a writing standpoint, was a smart idea. This was a publicity stunt, but from a writing standpoint, it was pretty smart and gave writers, new options for the character to go forward. This allowed you to go forward too. This does not allow forward momentum in it because there's nowhere to go from a storytelling standpoint, and it will likely be forgotten, later on. And I think this is something that somebody like Tom Taylor really needs to think about. It's there's no staying power in this whole concept because it's just, no character motivation, no forward momentum, there's no conflict that you can introduce here. Nothing really. It's just, what do you do? He's also apparently, rather than being a superhero, he's also protesting, which is another boring thing because nobody wants to read about superheroes protesting when they should be fighting crime. But, I guess this is what DC wants and Marvel is aiming for, but, not really going to introduce really good sales as much as a really cool storyline like this or this, or this. I mean, this is all a ploy to drum up sales, like killing off a character, like Chuck Dixon mentioned. But with killing off a character, you have opportunities as a writer. You have lasting consequences to that character's death. There's a lot that you can do with it. And it does one thing that as a writer that you should be concerned about, and that is the increase in sales. So that's all I have to say about that, and see you guys on the flip side.